It all started with a shout, her shout. "This mutt doesn't belong here!" Karen's voice sliced through the air like a knife, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. My blood ran cold. I had barely made it halfway down the street, my service dog trotting at my side, when Karen stormed out of her house, that hateful look plastered across her face. In all my years living in Sunnyside, I'd never seen her like this. I had no idea she could be so cruel, but there she was, standing at the edge of her porch, pointing a spray bottle straight at my dog. Before I could even register what was happening, she bent down and sprayed it right in his face. I stood frozen, watching in horror as my dog recoiled from the harsh mist, trying to crawl back toward me. The spray had a foul chemical smell that hit me instantly. My mind raced, trying to process the situation. What was going on? Why was she doing this? She didn't even know my dog. She didn't know the bond we shared, the way he was more than just an animal to me. He was my lifeline. But all of that didn't seem to matter to Karen. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" I finally shouted, stepping forward to protect my dog. But Karen wasn't having it. She was already shouting again, her voice growing louder and more vindictive with each word. "I'm calling the cops! You can't have this animal on my street." Her words echoed down the block, pulling neighbors to their windows, curtains pulled back as they watched the scene unfold. It felt like the entire world was watching me, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. I wanted to retaliate, to tell her exactly what I thought of her, but I knew I had to stay calm. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't lose control. Not now. Not when I had so much to lose. But then she took it a step further. She made the call. The one that could change everything. In the blink of an eye, police sirens blared in the distance, the sound growing louder and louder until 3 squad cars came into view. Their lights flashed across the neighborhood, making everything seem like a scene out of a movie. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life, and Karen had just escalated it to a level I wasn't prepared for. The officers parked and stepped out of their cars, looking confused but ready for whatever confrontation was about to unfold. Karen, with that smirk on her face, pointed directly at me. "Officers, arrest him. He's violating HOA rules, bringing dangerous animals into Sunnyside." I was stunned. She was trying to use the HOA against me? I could feel the eyes of the entire neighborhood on me, whispering behind their windows. My dog was still trembling on the grass, trying to get up but clearly shaken from the spray. I couldn't let this stand. This wasn't just a pet. This was my service dog, a certified, federally protected animal. But I didn't say anything at first. I stayed calm even as the officers circled around me, waiting for a decision. One of them pulled out a small black book, flipping through the pages as if they were some sort of law Bible. Karen, with her smug grin, looked at me like she had already won. "Illegal pets law," she muttered, like she had it all figured out. Her voice was dripping with satisfaction. She thought she had me trapped, but that's when I realized something. Something she didn't know. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Are you sure you want to go down this road?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, I've waited for this day. You people think you can do whatever you want. Not in Sunnyside." She was laughing, not realizing the storm she had just walked into. And that laugh? It was going to be her undoing. Don't miss what happens next. How a simple act of cruelty spirals into a nightmare for Karen when the law catches up with her. Hit subscribe and share this video now. You won't believe what happens when the tables turn. As Karen stood there, arms crossed, with her smug look plastered across her face, I could feel the tension building. She thought she had me cornered. My heart was pounding as the officers moved in closer, their eyes scanning me and my dog. I wanted to scream to tell them the truth, but something told me I needed to stay calm. My dog was still shaking, his fur damp from the spray, but I couldn't let that distract me. Karen had pushed me into this corner, but I wasn't going to let her win. "Officer, this isn't just any animal," I said, my voice steady now. "This is a certified service dog. He's not just some pet I bring along for a walk." I could feel Karen's eyes burning into me, but I didn't look at her. I knew what she was thinking. I've got him now. But then something strange happened. One of the officers, who had been flipping through that small black book, paused. He looked up at me, frowning. "Service dog, you say?" He was still unsure, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. "Yes," I said, reaching into my pocket slowly. I could feel Karen's glare digging into me, but I didn't care. "I have a card that proves it." I pulled out the laminated ID card that identified my dog as a federally recognized service animal. Karen scoffed, as if she had just heard the most ridiculous thing. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Anyone can print a card off the internet. He's dangerous. He scared my grandson last week. I don't care what kind of animal he is, he doesn't belong here." Her words stung. I clenched my fists, but I didn't respond. I was letting the facts speak for themselves. The officer holding the black book paused for a moment, flipping through the pages again. "Ma'am, this card looks legitimate," he said, glancing at Karen. "It says here, interfering with a service animal is a federal offense." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's smug grin started to falter, and I could see her trying to collect herself. She quickly turned to the officers, her voice shaking. "That's not right." "He's lying! I'm not the one breaking the law here. He's the one violating HOA rules, bringing dangerous animals into the neighborhood." But it was too late. The officer wasn't listening to her anymore. He was already reading through the legal text on the page, and his expression was changing. "Ma'am, assaulting a service animal, whether intentional or not, is a federal crime," he said slowly. His voice firm now. Karen's face went pale. She took a step back, her arrogance slipping away as the reality of what she had just done hit her. "No, no, no, no," she protested, her hands shaking as she pointed at me. "This isn't fair. He provoked me. He's lying." But there was no turning back now. The officer turned to me, his expression softening. "We're going to have to take a statement, sir. This is serious." I nodded, but I didn't feel relief. Not yet. Karen's face was twisted in rage, but there was something else behind her eyes now. Fear. She was realizing the gravity of the situation. The police were no longer on her side, and I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, she was going to get what she deserved. As Karen stood there, her hands trembling and her face flushed with anger, I couldn't help but notice how she was beginning to unravel. She had been so sure of herself just moments before, but now the fear was creeping in. She tried to recover, taking a deep breath and puffing out her chest as if she could still control the situation, but I could tell she was losing her grip. The officer nearest to her gave her a pointed look. "Ma'am, this isn't just a petty HOA dispute anymore. This is a federal matter." Karen's eyes widened, and for a brief moment I saw her flinch. She quickly turned to look at the others, her voice growing desperate. Wait, she stammered. "I didn't mean to. This is ridiculous." "He's the one causing trouble. You can't just arrest me for protecting my neighborhood." But the officer wasn't hearing it. "This is a federal matter now, and you're the one who assaulted a service animal." The reality of what was happening seemed to hit Karen all at once. The smile faded from her face. Her grip on control was slipping, and I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. But before Karen could say anything else, something unexpected happened. A new voice rang out from the crowd of onlookers. The sergeant holding the black book stepped forward, looking directly at me. "We need your statement, sir." "And we'll need that footage you mentioned." I paused, unsure of what would happen next. But before I could respond, I saw Karen's expression shift from defiance to panic as the weight of her actions began to sink in. The tension in the air thickened, and for the first time, Karen's confidence was slipping away. She was no longer the HOA president who ruled Sunnyside with an iron fist. The officers were no longer listening to her rants, and that smug grin she'd worn so proudly was replaced with something far less convincing: desperation. The sergeant's voice was calm but firm as he turned to me. "We'll need that footage, sir. If you've recorded this incident, it will be crucial." I nodded, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen as I thought about how much I had already captured. The last few minutes had been a blur, Karen's ranting, the spray bottle, and my dog trembling on the grass. But now, every moment of it was in my hands. Karen's eyes narrowed as she watched me, but there was nothing she could do. "You don't need that," she hissed, her voice rising. "He's lying." "It's all lies!" But her protests were falling flat. I tapped the screen, rewinding to the moment she sprayed my dog. As the video played, The entire block seemed to lean in, drawn in by the undeniable truth of what had happened. I could hear Karen's voice from the video yelling, "This mutt doesn't belong here," as she sprayed the bottle, her words unmistakably clear. The officers exchanged glances, and one of them took out his own body cam, confirming the footage. They turned back to Karen. Her defiance was crumbling as her words became more frantic. I'm just trying to protect my neighborhood," she cried, but the damage was done, and then, as if the weight of her mistake had finally hit her, Karen turned pale. You can't do this," she gasped, stumbling backward. "I'm the HOA president. You can't just arrest me." The officer didn't flinch. "Actually, you just assaulted a federally protected service animal. And that's a federal offense." Karen's face twisted with panic. The truth was closing in on her, and she knew it. Karen's face was ghostly pale now, and her words were stumbling over each other, barely making sense. "You can't do this," she gasped, her voice high-pitched with fear. "I'm the HOA president. I make the rules around here. I can't. This is all a mistake." She was trying to regain some semblance of control, but her usual air of superiority was evaporating faster than she could react. The officers were no longer responding to her tantrums. One of them, the sergeant, who had been calm throughout the chaos, stepped forward, looking directly at her with cold resolve. "Ma'am, it's not about your so-called rules. It's about the law. You've assaulted a service animal. That's a federal crime, and we take that seriously." His voice was firm, almost sympathetic, but there was no mistaking the authority behind his words. I stood there, watching the unraveling of Karen's power, feeling a surge of triumph. She had terrorized this neighborhood for years, using her position as HOA president to control everyone, to make us all feel small. But now she was the one on the receiving end. "You don't understand," Karen spat, now completely unhinged. "I know people. I know important people. I'll have your badges for this. You can't touch me." The audacity of her words made my blood boil, but I stayed silent, letting the officers handle it. One of the officers gave her a pitying glance. "Ma'am, you just assaulted a federally protected service animal, and that on its own is enough to have you arrested." But she wasn't finished yet. "No, no, no," Karen screeched. "I'll make sure you all pay for this. You'll regret it. You're making the biggest mistake of your careers." But the more she ranted, the more her authority disintegrated. The neighbors, who had been whispering behind their windows only moments before, were now stepping outside. No one was afraid of her anymore. They were done. And then, just when Karen thought she could scare them into submission, the unexpected happened. The sergeant turned to me again, his expression softer than before. "We'll need your full statement, sir. This is going beyond local." Karen's eyes widened, realization dawning on her. This was much bigger than a neighborhood dispute, but she still had no idea just how deep her downfall would go. Karen's panic was palpable now. She was stumbling back, her eyes darting around, searching for anyone who might come to her rescue. But there was no one. The officers weren't listening to her anymore. And the neighbors, who had once cowered under her threats, were standing tall, their phones raised, capturing every moment. This was no longer just about her power over the neighborhood. She was now facing something much bigger, something she couldn't control. "Wait!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "This isn't over. You don't understand. I have connections. I know people who will shut this whole thing down. You can't do this to me." Her words were desperate, but the officers weren't moved. The sergeant, who had been calm all along, stepped forward, his voice steady and sure. "Ma'am, you're under arrest. Not just for assaulting a service animal, but for the harassment, the false HOA notices, and whatever else we find as we dig into this." Karen's face contorted with rage. She was visibly shaking now, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "You can't arrest me," she spat. "I'm the HOA president. I have people." She seemed to think that her self-importance would somehow save her, but the officers were unmoved. Then, as if things weren't bad enough for her, there was a shift. One of the officers, still holding her arm firmly, leaned in and said something that made Karen's face drain of color. We've already contacted the federal agents. Your little web of influence ends now." Karen froze, her mouth opening and closing in disbelief. Her legs seemed to give out beneath her, and she stumbled back against the squad car as if trying to escape. But it was too late. The rumble of an unmarked black SUV could be heard as it rolled down the street. The officers stepped aside, and two men in suits emerged, flashing badges. They weren't local cops. They were federal agents. "Ma'am," one of the agents said with a voice as cold as ice, "you're under arrest by the U.S. Marshals. You've been under investigation for months." Karen's world came crashing down. She had been living in her little bubble of HOA power, bullying everyone she could, but now she was facing the full force of the law. The realization was written all over her face. She was done. As the agents moved in to cuff her, Karen tried one last desperate maneuver, her voice rising in a final shriek. "You can't do this!" "I know Judge Wilkins. He owes me. He'll fix this." The sergeant didn't even blink. "Ma'am, you've already been investigated for bribery. Judge Wilkins isn't going to save you now." The crowd around us gasped, their whispers growing louder as they learned of Karen's shady connections. But the agents weren't finished. With a sharp tug of the handcuffs, the marshals took Karen toward the SUV. Her struggles futile as the doors slammed shut behind her. This wasn't just a local incident anymore. This was federal, and Karen was about to learn the price of abusing her power. But there was still one more shock to come. As Karen was shoved into the back of the black SUV, her face twisted in disbelief, her mouth still moving with threats and protests. She screamed at the officers, at the neighbors, at anyone who would listen. "This isn't over! You'll regret this! I'm not finished with you!" But her words fell on deaf ears. No one was listening anymore. For the first time in years, the community that had lived in fear of her cruelty was united, not by fear, but by something stronger. As the doors to the SUV slammed shut, the crowd around us began to cheer. The same neighbors who had once cowered behind curtains were now standing shoulder to shoulder, their phones raised high, capturing the moment when Karen's reign of terror ended. "She's done," someone from across the street called out. "About time," another shouted, their voice filled with a sense of relief and pride. I looked around, seeing neighbors stepping forward, no longer afraid, no longer hiding. Mrs. Ramirez, the elderly woman Karen had fined for something as harmless as her garden flowers, came up to me, her hands shaking but her voice strong. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "For standing up when we couldn't." Others nodded in agreement, murmuring their thanks. I looked around and realized something. This wasn't just about me or my dog anymore. This was about a community finally free of the chains Karen had wrapped around us. Her power had crumbled, not because of any one person, but because everyone had finally decided enough was enough. As the federal SUV rolled down the street, the air felt lighter, the tension that had long hung over Sunnyside lifting for the first time in years. I stood there for a moment, holding my dog, who was finally calm again, his tail gently wagging. I whispered to him, "It's over, buddy. You're safe now." As the street buzzed with laughter and conversation, I realized that the real victory wasn't just Karen's arrest. It was the power of community, of standing up for what's right when others try to silence you. If you want to see more stories of triumph over tyranny, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this with others who need to see how standing up for what's right can change everything.